Adam drag-footed up one step, and then the other, and supported himself in the doorway. Then Cyrus raised his head. He looked with a distant curiosity. The identity of the distortion came to him slowly. He stood up, puzzled and wondering. He stuck the wooden pen in the ink bottle and wiped his fingers on his pants. "Why did he do it?" Cyrus asked softly. Adam tried to answer, but his mouth was caked and dry. He licked his lips and started them bleeding again. "I don't know," he said. Cyrus stumped over to him and grasped him by the arm so fiercely that he winced and tried to pull away. "Don't lie to me! Why did he do it? Did you have an argument?" "No." Cyrus wrenched at him. "Tell me! I want to know! Tell me! You have to tell me! I'll make you tell me! God damn it, you're always protecting him! Don't you think I know that? Did you think you were fooling me? Now, tell me, or by God, I'll keep you standing there all night." Adam cast about for an answer. "He doesn't think you love him." Cyrus released the arm and hobbled back to his chair and sat down. He rattled the pen in the ink bottle and looked blindly at his record book. "Alice," he said, "help Adam to bed. You'll have to cut his shirt off, I guess. Give him a hand." He got up again, went to the corner of the room where the coats hung on nails, and reaching behind the garments, brought out his shotgun, broke it to verify its load, and clumped out of the door. Alice raised her hand as though she would hold him back with a rope of air, and her rope broke and her face hid her thoughts. "Go in your room," she said. "I'll bring some water in a basin." Adam lay on the bed, a sheet pulled up to his waist, and Alice patted the cuts with a linen handkerchief dipped in warm water. She was silent for a long time, and then she continued Adam's sentence as though there had never been an interval. "He doesn't think his father loves him, but you love him. You always have." Adam did not answer her. She went on quietly. "He's a strange boy. You have to know him, all rough shell, all anger until you know." She paused to cough, leaned down and coughed, and when the spell was over, her cheeks were flushed and she was exhausted. You have to know him," she repeated. "For a long time he's given me little presents, pretty things you wouldn't think he'd even notice. But he doesn't give them right out. He hides them where he knows I'll find them. And you can look at him for hours and he won't ever give the slightest sign he did it. You have to know him." She smiled at Adam, and he closed his eyes. Chapter 4. Charles stood at the bar in the village inn, and Charles was laughing delightedly at the funny stories the night-stranded drummers were telling. He got out his tobacco sack with its meagre jingle of silver and bought the men a drink to keep them talking. He stood and grinned and rubbed his split knuckles, and when the drummers accepted his drink, raised their glasses and said, "Here's to you." Charles was delighted. He ordered another drink for his new friends, and then he joined them for some kind of deviltry in another place. When Cyrus stumped out into the night, he was filled with a kind of despairing anger at Charles. He looked on the road for his son, and he went to the inn to look for him, but Charles was gone. It's probable that if he had found him that night, he would have killed him, or tried to. The direction of a big act will warp history, but probably all acts do the same in their degree, down to a stone stepped over in the path, or a breath caught at sight of a pretty girl, or a fingernail nicked in the garden soil. Naturally, it was not long before Charles was told that his father was looking for him with a shotgun. He hid out for 2 weeks, and when he finally did return, murder had sunk back to simple anger, and he paid his penalty in overwork and a false theatrical humility. Adam lay 4 days in bed, so stiff and aching that he could not move without a groan. On the 3rd day his father gave evidence of his power with the military. He did it as a poultice to his own pride, and also as a kind of prize for Adam. Into the house, into Adam's bedroom, came a captain of cavalry and 2 sergeants in dress uniform of blue. In the dooryard their horses were held by 2 privates. Lying in his bed, Adam was enlisted in the army as a private in the cavalry. He signed the articles of war and took the oath, while his father and Alice looked on, and his father's eyes glistened with tears. After the soldiers had gone, his father sat with him a long time. "I've put you in the cavalry for a reason," he said. "Barrack life is not a good life for long, but the cavalry has work to do. I made sure of that. You're like going for the Indian country. There's action there's action coming. I can't tell you how I know. There's fighting on the way, though." "Yes, sir," Adam said. It has always seemed strange to me that it's usually men like Adam who have to do the soldiering. He didn't like fighting to start with, and far from learning to love it, as some men do, he felt an increasing revulsion for violence. Several times his officers looked closely at him for malingering, but no charge was brought. During these 5 years of soldiering, Adam did more detail work than any man in the squadron. But if he killed any enemy, it was an accident, a ricochet. Being a marksman and sharpshooter, he was peculiarly fitted to miss. By this time, the Indian fighting had become like dangerous cattle drives. The tribes were forced into revolt, driven and decimated, and the sad, sullen remnants settled on starvation lands. It was not nice work, but given the pattern of the country's development, it had to be done. To Adam, who was an instrument, who saw not the future farms, but only the torn bellies of fine humans, it was revolting and useless. When he fired his carbine to miss, he was committing treason against his unit, and he didn't care. The emotion of non-violence was building in him until it became a prejudice, like any other thought, stultifying prejudice. To inflict any hurt on anything for any purpose became inimical to him. He became obsessed with this emotion, for such it surely was, until it blotted out any possible thinking in its area. But never was there any hint of cowardice in Adam's army record. Indeed, he was commended 3 times, and then decorated for bravery. As he revolted more and more from violence, his impulse took the opposite direction. He ventured his life a number of times to bring in wounded men. He volunteered for work in field hospitals, even when he was exhausted from his regular duties. He was regarded by his comrades with contemptuous affection, and the unspoken fear men have of impulses they do not understand. Charles wrote to his brother regularly, of the farm and the village, of sick cows and a foaling mare, of the added pasture and the lightning-struck barn, of Alice's choking death from her consumption, and his father's move to a permanent paid position in the GAR in Washington. As with many people, Charles, who could not talk, wrote with fullness. He set down his loneliness and his perplexities, and he put on paper many things he did not know about himself. During the time Adam was away, he knew his brother better than ever before or afterward. In the exchange of letters there grew a closeness neither of them would have imagined. Adam kept one letter from his brother, not because he understood it completely, but because it seemed to have a covered meaning he could not get at. "Dear brother Adam," the letter said, "I take my pen in hand to hope you are in good health." He always started this way to ease himself gently into the task of writing. "I've not had your answer to my last letter, but I presume you have other things to do. Ha ha. The rain came wrong and damned the apple blossoms. There won't be many to eat this next winter, but I'll save what I can. Tonight I cleaned the house, and it is wet and soapy. It may not get any cleaner. How do you suppose Mother kept it the way she did? It does not look the same. Something settles down on it. I don't know what, but it will not scrub off. But I have spread the dirt around more evenly anyways. Ha ha. Did Father write you anything about his trip? He's gone clean out to San Francisco in California for an encampment of the Grand Army. The Secretary of War is going to be there, and Father is to introduce him. But this is not any great shucks to Father. He's met the President 3 or 4 times, and even been to supper at the White House. I'd like to see the White House. Maybe you and me can go together when you come home. Father could put us up for a few days, and he'd be wanting to see you anyways. I think I'd better look around for a wife. This is a good farm, and even if I'm no bargain, there's girls could do worse than this farm. What do you think? You did not say if you're going to come live home when you get out of the army. I hope so. I miss you. The writing stopped there. There was a scratch on the page and a splash of ink. Then it went on in pencil, but the writing was different. In pencil it said, later. Well, right there the pen give out. One of the points broke off. I'll have to buy another pen point in the village, rusted right through. The words began to flow more smoothly. I guess I should wait for a new pen point and not write with a pencil. Only I was sitting here in the kitchen with the lamp on, and I guess I got to thinking, and it came on late, after 12, I guess. But I never looked. Old Black Joe started crowing out in the henhouse. Then Mother's rocking chair creaked for all the world like she was sitting in it. I don't take truck with that, but it set me minding backwards, how you do sometimes. I guess I'll tear this letter up maybe, because what's the good of writing stuff like this? The words began to race now, as though they couldn't get out fast enough. If I'm to throw it away, I'd just as well set it down, the letter said. It's like the whole house was alive and had eyes everywhere, and like there was people behind the door just ready to come in if you looked away. It kind of makes my skin crawl. I never understood why our father did it. Why didn't he like that knife I bought him for his birthday? Why didn't he? It was a good knife, and he needed a good knife. If he had used it, or even honed it, or took it out of his pocket and looked at it, that's all he had to do. If he'd liked it, I wouldn't have took out after you. I had to take out after you. Seems like to me my mother's chair is rocking a little. It's just a lie. I don't take any truck with that. Seems like to me there's something not finished. Seems like when you half finished a job and can't think what it was. Something didn't get done. I shouldn't be here. I ought to be wandering around the world instead of sitting here on a good farm looking for a wife. There's something wrong, like it didn't get finished, like it happened too soon and left something out. It's me should be where you are and you here. I never thought like this before. Maybe because it's late. It's later than that. I just looked out and it's first dawn. I don't think I fell off to sleep. How could the night go so fast? I can't go to bed now. I couldn't sleep anyways. The letter was not signed. Maybe Charles forgot he had intended to destroy it and sent it along, but Adam saved it for a time. Whenever he read it again, it gave him a chill, and he didn't know why. Chapter 5. On the ranch, the little Hamiltons began to grow up, and every year there was a new one. George was a tall, handsome boy, gentle and sweet, who had from the first a kind of courtliness. Even as a little boy he was polite, and what they used to call no trouble. From his father he inherited the neatness of clothing and body and hair, and he never seemed ill-dressed even when he was. George was a sinless boy, and grew to be a sinless man. No crime of commission was ever attributed to him, and his crimes of omission were only misdemeanors. In his middle life, at about the time such things were known about, it was discovered that he had pernicious anemia. It's possible that his virtue lived on a lack of energy. Behind George, Will grew along, dumpy and stolid. Will had little imagination, but he had great energy. From childhood, he was a hard worker. If anyone would tell him what to work at, once told, he was indefatigable. He was a conservative, not only in politics but in everything. Ideas he found revolutionary, and he avoided them with suspicion and distaste. Will liked to live so that no one could find fault with him, and to do that he had to live as nearly like other people as possible. Maybe his father had something to do with Will's distaste for either change or variation. When Will was a growing boy, his father had not been long enough in the Salinas Valley to be thought of as an old-timer. He was, in fact, a foreigner, and an Irishman. At that time the Irish were much disliked in America. They were looked upon with contempt, particularly on the East Coast. But a little of it must have seeped out to the West, and Samuel had not only variability, but was a man of ideas and innovations. In small, cut-off communities, such a man is always regarded with suspicion, until he has proved he is no danger to the others. A shining man like Samuel could and can cause a lot of trouble. He might, for example, prove too attractive to the wives of men who knew they were dull. Then there were his education and his reading, the books he bought and borrowed. his knowledge of things that could not be eaten or worn or cohabited with, his interest in poetry, and his respect for good writing. If Samuel had been a rich man like the Thorns or the Delmars, with their big houses and wide flat lands, he would have had a great library. The Delmars had a library, nothing but books in it and panelled in oak. Samuel, by borrowing, had read many more of the Delmars' books than the Delmars had. In that day, an educated rich man was acceptable. He might send his sons to college without comment, might wear a vest and a white shirt and tie in the daytime or weekday, might wear gloves and keep his nails clean. And since the lives and practices of rich men were mysterious, who knows what they could use or not use? But a poor man, what need had he for poetry or for painting or for music not fit for singing or dancing? Such things did not help him bring in a crop or keep a scrap of cloth on his children's backs. And if in spite of this he persisted, maybe he had reasons which would not stand the light of scrutiny. Take Samuel, for instance. He made drawings of work he intended to do with iron or wood. That was good and understandable, even enviable, but on the edges of the plans he made other drawings, sometimes trees, sometimes faces or animals or bugs, sometimes just figures that you couldn't make out at all. And these caused men to laugh with embarrassed uneasiness. Then too you never knew in advance what Samuel would think or say or do. It might be anything. The first few years after Samuel came to Salinas Valley, there was a vague distrust of him, and perhaps Will, as a boy, heard talk in the San Lucas store. Little boys don't want their fathers to be different from other men. Will might have picked up his conservatism right then. Later, as the other children came along and grew, Samuel belonged to the valley, and it was proud of him in the way a man who owns a peacock is proud. They weren't afraid of him any more, for he did not seduce their wives or lure them out of sweet mediocrity. The Salinas Valley grew fond of Samuel, but by that time Will was formed. Certain individuals, not by any means always deserving, are truly beloved of the gods. Things come to them without their effort or planning. Will Hamilton was one of these, and the gifts he received were the ones he could appreciate. As a growing boy, Will was lucky. Just as his father could not make money, Will could not help making it. When Will Hamilton raised chickens and his hens began to lay, the price of eggs went up. As a young man, when two of his friends who ran a little store came to the point of despondent bankruptcy, Will was asked to lend them a little money to tide them over the quarter's bills, and they gave him a 1/3 interest for a pittance. He was not niggardly. He gave them what they asked for. The store was on its feet within 1 year, expanding in 2, opening branches in 3, and its descendants, a great mercantile system, now dominate a large part of the area. Will also took over a bicycle and tools shop for a bad debt. Then a few rich people of the valley bought automobiles, and his mechanic worked on them. Pressure was put on him by a determined poet whose dreams were brass, cast iron, and rubber. This man's name was Henry Ford, and his plans were ridiculous, if not illegal. Will grumblingly accepted the southern half of the valley as his exclusive area, and within 15 years the valley was too deep in Fords, and Will was a rich man driving a Mammon. Tom, the third son, was most like his father. He was born in a fury, and he lived in fighting. Tom came headlong into life. He was a giant in joy and enthusiasms. He didn't discover the world and its people, he created them. When he read his father's books, he was the first. He lived in a world shining and fresh and as uninspected as Eden on his 6th day. His mind plunged like a colt in a happy pasture, and when later the world put up fences, he plunged against the wire, and when the final stockade surrounded him, he plunged right through it and out. And as he was capable of giant joy, so did he harbour huge sorrow, so that when his dog died, the world ended. Tom was as inventive as his father, but he was bolder. He had tried things his father would not dare. Also, he had a large concupiscence to put the spurs in his flanks, and this Samuel did not have. Perhaps it was his driving sexual need that made him remain a bachelor. It was a very moral family he was born into. It might be that his dreams and his longing and his outlets, for that matter, made him feel unworthy, drove him sometimes whining into the hills. Tom was a nice mixture of savagery and gentleness. He worked inhumanly, only to lose in effort his crushing impulses. The Irish do have a despairing quality of gaiety, but they have also a dour and brooding ghost that rides on their shoulders and peers in on their thoughts. Let them laugh too loudly, it sticks a long finger down their throats. They condemn themselves before they're charged, and this makes them defensive always. When Tom was 9 years old, he worried because his pretty little sister Molly had an impediment in her speech. He asked her to open her mouth wide and saw that a membrane under her tongue caused the trouble. "I can fix that," he said. He led her to a secret place far from the house, whetted his pocket knife on a stone, and cut the offending halter of speech, and then he ran away and was sick. The Hamilton house grew as the family grew. It was designed to be unfinished, so that lean-tos could jut out as they were needed. The original room and kitchen soon disappeared in a welter of these lean-tos. Meanwhile, Samuel got no richer. He developed a very bad patent habit, a disease many men suffer from. He invented a part of a threshing machine, better, cheaper, and more efficient than any in existence. The patent attorney ate up this little profit for the year. Samuel sent his models to a manufacturer who promptly rejected the plans, but used the method. The next few years were kept lean by the sewing, and the drains stopped only when he lost the suit. It was his first sharp experience with the rule that without money you cannot fight money. But he had caught the patent fever, and year after year the money made by threshing and by smithing was drained off in patents. The Hamilton children went barefoot, and their overalls were patched, and food was sometimes scarce to pay for the crisp blueprints with cogs and planes and elevations.